And I think this is going to have a radicalizing effect. And the new supreme leader has seen his father killed, his mother killed, his wife killed, and his son killed. He's hardly going to be in a generous mood at the end of this conflict. And if you remember, when US planes struck Libya in 1986 and killed members of Gaddafi's family, a year later, the Libyan plot brought down Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland, killing, I think, 270 people in the process. So the revenge is a dish best eaten cold, and sometime after the issue that you're revenging for. Now, that's not to say I have any sympathy with the regime in Iran.
A former MI6 chief has just reminded everyone what happens when you kill a leader's family. Sitting beside him is a former CIA director, and his verdict on the man who ordered these strikes is blunt. He doesn't understand the consequences of his own decisions. And the example he reaches for is a warm, cheerful phone call to Vladimir Putin. Let's watch it together. And before I tell you to like and hit that subscribe button, please allow me the chance to earn that from you.
Do you have a sense of how long this might go on? And are your successors in the CIA likely feeding back information to the White House about what's going on in Tehran in terms of the power structure and what's happening there?
Well, Andrew, I certainly hope that my former colleagues at the CIA are feeding that intelligence to the White House. I do hope it's getting into the senior circles, Donald Trump and others, but Donald Trump has not been somebody that has been impressed with U.S. intelligence previously. He tends to disregard it when he disagrees with it. I don't think anybody can say how long this conflict is going to last. I certainly don't think that the administration's spokespeople have had any type of consistent message. Sometimes they say it's going to be 4 to 6 weeks or take a long time. Others, as you pointed out, say it's almost fully complete. But I do think that this administration, the Trump administration, is taking things, if not day by day, hour by hour, to see which way things are going. I think the economic implications and repercussions of this war are having an impact on Donald Trump's thinking. But I don't believe that it's going to be ended anytime soon. I think the Iranians are going to continue. I think Mr. Churchill's words were very wise and certainly apply here, because the Iranians, I think, or at least those who are still in power, are not going to forgive and forget the tremendous destruction that has taken place in their country.
So, John Sawyers, I'm trying to ask you to imagine that you are in the old job, as it were, advising Keir Starmer in all of this. I was listening to an Iranian general give a press conference on Iranian television, and he said, what we have done is we have got the Americans into the wrong place. They are planning for a short war. We are going to give them a long war, and that's going to cause them real trouble. What would be your advice to Starmer at the beginning of this? He thought that he didn't understand the end game. Do you?
Well, I don't think Keir Starmer did understand the end game, because none of us did. And one of the problems in here, as you're implying, Andrew, is that the United States have been very unclear what their goal is. And unless you have a clear goal, it's very hard to determine when that end state has been reached. So I think Keir Starmer's handled this reasonably well. I wouldn't fault him on the core decisions he's taken about holding back from involvement in the US-Israeli strikes, but being willing to support our friends and allies and British bases overseas in the way that he has. Now, you can quibble with some of the details, but I think broadly speaking, he's got the approach right. And being trolled by Donald Trump has not been bad for him politically either. So I think he's done reasonably well. Now, looking ahead, as John Brennan says, and hello, John, great to be with you on the program. John and I were in harness together, as you say, for several years, and he was a great partner at the CIA. What I would be advising is that there are two wars going on here. There's the military war, where the US and Israel have devastated Iran's military capability, destroyed much of its military industries, and has prevailed very widely over the battlefield. But there's also an economic war going on, and Iran has been quite successful in closing the Strait of Hormuz, of disrupting not just oil and gas, but other essential commodities like fertilizer components and sulfur copper and aluminium that flow through that strait, and they are having a big impact on markets. I think yesterday's remarks by the president were as much to calm markets as they were to signal an end to the war. But I do think he's now committed to this war coming to an end sometime in the days ahead. But he's a mercurial man, and inconsistency is his leitmotif.
Indeed. And picking up on that word mercurial, John Brennan, Mr. Brennan, what did you make of that extraordinarily affable and cheerful, lengthy conversation he had with Vladimir Putin, and the fact that he's removing some of the problems with the oil supply for Russia, some of the sanctions on Russian oil, which makes life much, much easier for the Kremlin and for Moscow. At exactly the same time, he's furious with the UK and the Europeans. What's going on there, do you think?
Well, I think it's consistent with Donald Trump's consistent miscalculations of the foreign policy implications of some of his actions. He continues to give Vladimir Putin a pass, and what he has done now in terms of relaxing some of the sanctions on Russian oil really gives Putin a boost, just when I think some of the sanctions against the Russian oil companies was starting to take a toll. So again, Donald Trump is somebody who tends to be very sort of transactional in single dimensions. He doesn't have a good appreciation of the global chessboard and the various implications of his moves and the second and third order effects. And so, you have an economic dimension to this, you have a military dimension to this conflict right now in the Gulf. But also, one of the things I'm concerned about is when will the Iranians opt for terrorism? Because it is one of the arrows in their quiver. And it takes some time. But for example, the head of the Quds Force, Ismail Ghani, is somebody who is very radical. And he's the one who would be responsible for putting in place those types of terrorist plans. So the Iranians are very patient. They believe that they can outlast the Americans and the Israelis. So I don't think that even if Donald Trump wants to end the war tomorrow or this week, it means that this conflict and this tension between the United States and Iran is going to end anytime soon.
So, John, do you agree with that? This is going to be a lengthy conflict.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a continuity of the regime in Iran. The regime is intact, even if their military capability is largely destroyed. And I think this is going to have a radicalizing effect. The new supreme leader has seen his father killed, his mother killed, his wife killed, and his son killed. He's hardly going to be in a generous mood at the end of this conflict. If you remember, when US planes struck Libya in 1986 and killed members of Gaddafi's family, a year later, the Libyan plot brought down Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland, killing, I think, 270 people in the process. So the revenge is a dish best eaten cold, and sometime after the issue that you're revenging for. Now, that's not to say I have any sympathy with the regime in Iran. I think they are a terrible, oppressive organization, which in some ways has brought these ills upon themselves. At some point, a future leader of Iran is going to have to face up to the predicament that the country faces, the collapsed economy, a failed defense strategy, a failed revolution, really, and being hated by the majority of the population. Now, it took the Soviet Union 3 goes to before they came up with Gorbachev, who then transformed the country. And even that wasn't really permanent. Now, but someone is going to have to do that in Iran at some point.
And so, John, you mentioned Lockerbie. My sister Lucy was the local doctor on duty in Lockerbie on that night, so I remember it very, very well indeed. Do you agree with John Brennan that there is now a threat, therefore, of unrestrained Iranian terror attacks, sleeper cells and the like in the West?
Well, I think the Iranians they have active forces overseas, as the head of MI5 has said recently. There have been up to 20 plots foiled in this country, plots aimed at Jewish targets and at Iranian dissidents here in the UK. And thanks to MI5 skills working with the police, they've all been foiled. And that shows a certain sort of ineptitude on the Iranian side. But I think there will be there is a determination on the Iranian side to get their own back in some way or other, and terrorism is certainly one option. There's another terrorist risk as well, which is that you can't rule out this regime collapsing. I don't think there will be some regime change, but there is a possibility of regime collapse, especially if the Israelis go around supporting Kurdish separatists or Baluch separatists and foment a civil war in the country. And now then you have a different sort of terrorism that could emerge out of Iran, a bit like emerged out of Afghanistan after so that stage in the 1990s.
Mr. Brennan, can I pick up a bit on that, but ask you what you think the political impact in Washington would be of this war going on for much longer? Clearly, President Trump would love to declare victory and walk away. But if he's not able to do that, how serious is it for him?
Well, I think it already is showing strains within the Republican Party, as a number of individuals have really questioned the wisdom of going forward with this war. And the poll numbers indicate that, less than 40% or so, I think is the latest one, of the American public that supports this. So I think given that we are in a election year and the midterms are going to be critically important, I think Donald Trump and his advisors are going to try to do what they can to recover from any type of negative impact that this war is bringing. But this is where the energy supplies out of the Gulf, I think, are going to be critical. And if, in fact, this is going to be protracted, and if there is going to be some option for terrorism that the Iranians are going to exercise, again, that could have political repercussions here in advance of the midterm elections.
Let me ask you a little bit more about the oil pricing, because that Iranian general I was quoting earlier on was kind of gleefully noting the price going higher and higher, 120, 150, could go to 150, as if this was a fantastic win for Iran. I know that the American economy is, to a certain extent, protected from oil price hikes around the world. But again, is that the real pressure on President Trump? Will it be people from business, people from Wall Street, picking up the phone and saying this has got to stop?
Well, I think there could be a couple of pressures. If there are additional U.S. casualties, that certainly is going to apply more pressure on Trump. But I do think it's the economics here that is really going to, I think, determine some of his next moves. But, the Iranian economy is very dependent on the oil exports that it has to China and India and other places in Russia. And so, as we well know, the problems in Iran that led to the demonstrations and protests really were economically based. The Iranian economy is in shambles as a result of the many years of sanctions. So, yes, there are a lot of individuals in Iran who really are, very, very much aggrieved by the oppression of the Iranian theocracy. But at the same time, it's the economic problems really that are going to be a source of continued discontent. So I agree with Sir John. There could be some fracturing inside of the Iranian government that could lead to some type of collapse. And then it would be a real, firefight inside for gaining control. But, again, there's so many different aspects of this conflict that I think are going to be long-lasting, long after the last U.S. missile drops.
Well, to everybody listening, I don't think you get a better or shrewder inside analysis of what's going on than you've just heard. John Brennan, Sir John Sawyers, it's been a privilege. Thank you both very much indeed.
Let me tell you who you just listened to, because it matters. John Brennan ran the CIA. Sir John Sawyers ran MI6. They worked together for years. Between them, they have spent their careers doing precisely one thing, which is working out what happens next. And Andrew Marr was right at the end. You will not get a shrewder read on this anywhere. So here is what they actually said, and none of it is comforting. Start with Brennan's opening answer, because it is quietly astonishing. He is asked whether the CIA is feeding intelligence to the White House, and he says he hopes so. He hopes it is reaching Donald Trump. But he adds that Trump has never been impressed by American intelligence, and that he tends to disregard it when he disagrees with it. A former director of the agency saying on British radio that the president ignores the work when he does not like the conclusion. That is your first clue about everything that follows. Then, Sawyers gives you the structural problem, and it is the sort of thing that sounds obvious only once somebody says it. The United States has never been clear what its goal is, and unless you have a clear goal, you cannot possibly know when you have reached it. That is why the messaging is all over the place. 4 to 6 weeks from one spokesman, nearly finished from another. Brennan says the administration is working hour by hour, watching which way the wind blows. This is not a strategy being executed. It is a mood being managed. Soros also points out something almost nobody has said out loud. There are two wars here, not one. There is the military war, which America and Israel have won comprehensively. Iran's military capability is devastated, its industries wrecked. But there is also an economic war, and in that one, Iran has done rather well. The Strait of Hormuz has been effectively closed, and it is not only oil and gas going through there. It is fertilizer components, sulfur, aluminium, the stuff that grows food and builds things. Iran cannot beat the American military, so it has gone for the global supply chain instead. And Soros reckons the president's soothing noises this week were aimed as much at calming the markets as at ending anything. Then, Marr asks about the Putin phone call and the relaxing of sanctions on Russian oil. Warm, cheerful, lengthy, at the same time as being furious with Britain and Europe. And Brennan's answer is the thing this video is named after. He says it fits a pattern of consistent miscalculation. Trump keeps giving Putin a pass, and relaxing those sanctions has handed him a boost at the exact moment they were starting to bite. Then the line that explains the whole presidency. Trump is transactional in single dimensions. He does not have a good appreciation of the global chessboard or of what his moves cause 2 and 3 steps down the line. That is the theme of this channel, wearing a suit and a security clearance, second and third order effects. The consequences that arrive later land on other people and never get traced back to the decision that caused them. And Brennan names the one he is watching for. He is waiting to see when Iran turns to terrorism, because it is an arrow in their quiver, and the man who would organize it heads the Quds force and is described as very radical. The Iranians are patient. They believe they can outlast everyone. Which brings you to the part you saw at the top. Soros points out that the new supreme leader has lost his father, his mother, his wife and his son. Then he reaches for the precedent. America struck Libya in 1986 and killed members of Gaddafi's family. 2 years later, Pan Am 103 came down over Lockerbie and 270 people died. Revenge, he says, is a dish best eaten cold. And then Andrew Marr says quietly that his own sister was the doctor on duty in Lockerbie that night. Be clear about what Soros is not saying. He has no sympathy for the Iranian regime. He calls it oppressive, a failed revolution with a collapsed economy, hated by most of its own people, and says it has brought much of this on itself. He is not defending anyone. He is telling you what happens next, based on what happened last time. And the last time is the point. MI5 says up to 20 plots have already been foiled in this country, aimed at Jewish targets and Iranian dissidents living here. All stopped, so far, so no jokes at the end of this one. 2 men who spent their lives in this business sat down and said, in the politest possible language, that the man who started this does not appear to have thought about what comes after. If that is worth knowing, share it with someone who thinks it finished last week. Because, as Brennan put it, this will be with us long after the last American missile drops.